Hey, what's up, everybody? Hey, quick little intro because this kid deserves it. What you guys are about to listen to is honestly one of the most amazing young men I have met in a long time. And his name is Elijah Kahlenberg. He is going to be the focus of today's Deep Shallow Dive guest interview. And I just want you to really pay attention because he's 21 years old. He's Jewish and he is such a bright young man who is so articulate. I think you're really going to enjoy this interview, and it's probably the least that you will hear me talk because I don't even need to say anything because he does all the talking. All right, enjoy the episode.
The following podcast is a Deep Shallow Dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
No, so anyway, I was looking at that video of you, and then I'm like, oh my God, I think that horse is gonna like knock you over. So you're gonna have to tell us what happened with that. But all right, so listen, everybody, today is honestly a special day on the Deep Shallow Dive because I finally found the person I've been looking for in order to shed some light on so many things. What started out as me trying to find a college student to really help us understand, what happened with all these college protests and all that has now turned into me finding an unbelievable resource. And I'm going to call you a young man because you are, but Elijah Kahlenberg is somebody that you guys absolutely need to know. And he is somebody that I personally am taking a very vested interest in because this guy's legit. And he has, a unique perspective on this situation that's taking place in Gaza between the Israelis and Palestinians because he is Jewish. And he is a college student, and he is somebody that is really in the throes of what's going on at not only all these universities, but really what's going on with Generation Z and taking a look at the activism. So Elijah K., welcome to the Deep Shallow Dive, man. I really, really am excited to have you.
Thank you, Ray, and it's a pleasure to be on. I've followed your work for a long time, and I can only say I'm very, very honored to be on your podcast. It means a lot.
I appreciate that. All right, so listen, start off by explain to everybody your background, because I think everybody needs to just understand who you are, your religion, how you grew up, and really what has gotten you to where you are now, because you're only 21.
Correct. The reason I am where I am today, my story is not complete without the story of my family. And I talked to you a little about this early on. My father, he's Ashkenazi Jewish. His family hails from around Ukraine, Russia, Poland, that region. And actually, I had a fourth great-grandfather who was part of the first Aliyah, which is the first wave of Zionist pioneers who went to Ottoman Palestine. And to them, the land was one of liberation and promise. But I soon learned that that dream was not true for everyone. My mother's side is Sephardi Jewish. Her family actually hails from around Turkey, Greece, and Syria. And they ended up migrating to the newly formed state of Israel in the 1950s. And when they arrived in the land, they had a completely different story. But ingraining such a history, ingraining such disparate narratives within the Jewish context, that promoted me to begin to understand the story of the other. I was never told growing up really about the story of Palestinians, their traumas, their aspirations, their identity. I wasn't told any of it. And so that's when I got to high school, I took the personal initiative to begin to meet and talk with Palestinians. And I met the first Palestinian individual around the age of 15, I believe. His name was Ahmad, and he went to high school with me. I actually found him because he was outside of my high school one day, and he was wearing a keffiyeh, which is the Palestinian traditional dar. And I started off our conversation by essentially saying, I know that's a Palestinian cultural garb, but it really reminds me, the way you're wearing it, of a talit, which is a Jewish prayer shawl. And we began talking about our two cultures. And by having that conversation, we began to see how similar we were to one another. Really, we came away from that conversation, which probably lasted around 2 hours, not viewing ourselves as others anymore, but as brothers. And that was really a spark for me to pursue the work I'm currently pursuing in college. When I got to college, I always had this dream. I began to say, hey, I'm not unique. If more Jews and more Palestinians can simply talk with the other, they can have that same transformation. They can begin to see that we are one family and we're not inherent enemies. And so that ethos pushed me to form a group called Atidna. Now, Atidna combines the Hebrew word atid for future with the Arabic suffix na for our, to hence mean our future. And we pursue two basic goals on college campuses. The first goal is to solidify through peace events that Jews and Arabs are cousins, we're one family, and we're not inherent enemies. And we can go more in depth about those peace events later on. And our second goal is to bring together both peoples to have a conversation about anything and everything pertaining to Israel and Palestine. At our core, we're a free speech group, and there is no organization that exists on college campuses before us that was dedicated to creating conversations around Israel and Palestine, specifically by bringing in Jews, Arabs, Israelis, Palestinians, Zionists, anti-Zionists, all into this conversation. And so our work is very unique and it's very new territory. We've been doing it for around 2.5 years thus far, and we've been wildly successful. We've grown to 6 college campuses, and we have 15 prospective campuses that are working to bring us to their campus. And I would say the work is very fruitful. Of course, there are disagreements in these spaces, right? There are Zionist students and anti-Zionist students, right? But what we see is that there is a lot of agreement. There's a lot of realizations by the participants in this organization, specifically many Jews and Arabs, specifically many Jews and Palestinian Arabs, that our identities are more similar to each other than to anyone else, right? And they come to the realization that we're one family. And there's no better way to humanize someone than to view them as part of your family. And that's why this work is so powerful. And that's just one of the works I've been doing that's really gaining notoriety. You've talked about a lot of my media coverage. In Al Jazeera, for example, they covered my work with Atidna. But I've also done other notable works in the realm of peacemaking. Another group I'm a part of, which I'm on the board of, is called Roots. In Hebrew, they are called Shorashim. In Arabic, they are called Jador. And they are the only group in the West Bank, operating out of the West Bank on a Palestinian farm, that works to bring together Jews and Arabs in a joint and civil space for mutual understanding, for reconciliation, and for work that promotes nonviolence. It's the only group that is really breaking down the apartheid and segregation that currently defines the West Bank. And I'm currently on the board of that organization. I actually had the opportunity to work with them for months in 2022. And I lived in the West Bank. I lived on a Palestinian farm, and seeing those experiences first and foremost, that was really transformative for me. I was able to go through checkpoints. I saw the situation for myself. And it's my belief that the best way for people to understand the situation is to see it with their own eyes. There is no one, I think, that comes away from experiencing both the Palestinian and Israeli peoples in the West Bank and saying it's not apartheid, right? It's a terrible situation. It's one that strips Palestinians of their dignity, their basic humanity, and their civil rights. And we can get much more in detail about legally why I believe this is an apartheid system. And that's another component of my peace building work, trying to unify our two peoples in the most segregated and divided portion of this land and this conflict. The last aspect of peace building, which you already highlighted, that I'm involved with, is my work on the campus protests. I was a Jewish voice who was very outspoken in favor of the protest and in favor of divestment. We can talk much more in detail about what transpired on that day. As you mentioned, I was pushed by a state trooper on horseback. I sprained my ankle, right? This was a very grueling situation for many students at the hands of law enforcement, even though we were just trying to articulate our basic First Amendment rights and saying that we do not believe our university should be complicit in the genocide in Gaza. But I took a very strong stance with that. That's what got me on Al Jazeera. They also covered my work with Atidna, and I've only grown from there, right? More and more people have been following my work through various platforms, YouTube, Instagram, and inshallah, B'ezrat Hashem, God willing, we can only expand our work from here.
All right, so that was fantastic. That was a good layout of really, helping people get to know you a little bit. So let me ask you this, you talked a little bit about what you were told prior to really you starting to do your own research in high school. What was that? What were you told? And I guess what do most Jewish kids and people get told about really, it's really the creation of Israel in 1948. What are you guys told that, like, how that happened? What's the story?
Yeah. So we in normative Jewish educations are taught a very whitewashed version of Israeli history. And there's two main myths about the state of Israel that we're told. The first is about 1948, in that it was a defensive war, that everything they did in 1948 was a response to the invading Arab armies, and that they were in an existential crisis and they had to respond. The other myth is about Palestinians, the notion that Palestinians fled on their own accord, specifically because leaders in the Arab world told them to leave their homes to allow Arab armies to come in and destroy the nascent Jewish state. And we know that this is a completely false and manufactured concept within history from both Israeli historians and external historians. There was a group of historians called the New Historians. Many of your listeners probably know about Ilan Pappé, Benny Morris, and Avi Schleim. They're the ones who define this group of historians. They're called the New Historians. They all rally around an ideology called post-Zionism, but that's getting into very niche concepts. What they did in essence, was right about 1948. They were exposed to archival materials that were released in 1978 about the creation of the state of Israel. And one of the most damning pieces of evidence that was released from those archival materials was something known as Plan Dalet. It was an order created by Ben Gurion and others in the Zionist establishment to hand down to military generals. And what this order said to do, in summary, was that if Arabs resisted when you were going to various villages, you either have to expel them if they resist, but if they don't resist, you don't have to expel them. This is what Plan Dalet was known to the public. In more niche circles, specifically in the communiques that Ben Gurion and other Zionist officials were handing down to military generals in the Haganah and Palmach and other Zionist militias, we know that that notion was very false. It was falsified. What they essentially told the generals was that you will have these set of villages and you have to expel them. It does not matter if they resist or don't resist, right? There were claims in the public, of course, from various Arab leaders saying, "Oh, we're going to drive the Jews into the sea," but really, in practice, they had no intent to do that.
That's amazing, dude. How did you learn all this? I mean, you are so well versed in this, and you know the historical context. Did you just learn this on your own?
Yeah, so a lot of the studying I've been doing relates to the work of the New Historians. I myself am writing a thesis on this, believe it or not. My thesis in college is actually about one of the terrorist groups in the early state of Israel called Lehi. They're one of two terrible organizations that ended up committing the Deir Yassin massacre. And so across a lot of my studies, I've come across this history, but a lot of this history, believe it or not, before the New Historians ever wrote it into an official academic study, was given orally by Palestinians. Palestinians knew this history. It was oral to them, right? It was never written down. And so I myself have been exposed to a lot of this history simply from the testimony of my Palestinian brothers and sisters, right? You can go to any old grandma on Instagram to see that this is the narrative that Palestinians are taught, right? This is the true narrative in many senses of the word, right? It's their lived experience, and we should not deny that. And so I've ingrained a lot of this history simply by talking with Palestinians, and it's done a world for me for sure.
That's amazing. Yeah, those new historians. I mean, Ilan Pappé, you listen to him. I haven't listened to Benny Morris or Avi Shlom too much. I need to listen to those guys. But like Norman Finkelstein, you know, Miko Peled, I'm trying to think. Noam Chomsky, I'm sure you've listened to Noam Chomsky quite a bit. I'm trying to think who else is a really... Gabe, what's that guy's name, man? I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. Gabor Mate. Yeah. These guys are legit, man. These guys are legit. And I think all of them are Jewish. So the fact that I honestly, I'm so surprised. Oh, Gideon Levy, who's, you know, a world-renowned journalist for 40 years with Haaretz. Like, when I talk to people and they're like, well, where do you get your information? I'm like, I get it from these guys. Like, I get it from people who have skin in the game. And now, honestly, I'm going to get it from you. I'm blown away at your knowledge base. Okay, let me ask you this, because you've mentioned this word several times, and this word has become, I mean, I think they let this word out of Pandora's box and they completely regret it now. And I think you know what I'm going to say, and it's Zionist.
Yeah.
So you tell us your definition of Zionists.
Yeah. I think there are two definitions, and this is what Edward Said wrote. There's the definition according to Zionists, and there's the definition according to the standpoint from its victims, namely Palestinians. For Zionists, for Jews, right, that were in the Zionist movement, this is a liberation movement, right? This is the right for Jews to self-determine in their ancient and ancestral homeland. However, for its victims, this is an ideology of ethnic cleansing, one that is predicated on an ethno-nationalist goal of having a 51% plus Jewish demographic majority in the land of Palestine. That means it has to come at the expense of the indigenous inhabitants. There had to be mass removal in 1948 until today to maintain that ideology. And so that's why it's so abrasive. It's an ethno-nationalist ideology, and in practice, it's shown as such, right? We had the Nakba, the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians from their ancestral homeland, and we have this ideology still playing out today with the genocide in Gaza. 40,000 Palestinians have been killed. And it's no surprise that really early on in this war, many figures, including Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, had the overt intent to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians from this land with the complicity of the United States, right? They were trying to put pressure on Egypt to accept Palestinians into the Sinai. Now, everyone with a brain knows that Israel was never going to let those Palestinians back into Gaza. Their goal was to annex and resettle Gaza like they did before 2005. And so anyone with a brain knows this ideology is ethno-supremacist. It comes at the expense of anyone who is not Jewish in this land. It's a Jewish supremacist ideology, right? And honestly, 5 years ago, that would have been a controversial statement. But I think today people are really beginning to see this history, beginning to see the effects of Zionism play out. And you don't even have to look far, right? Look at the West Bank, where Palestinian villages routinely get torched, right? Look at Huwara from a summer ago, which was set ablaze, right? There are Palestinians that are facing the detriments of Zionism every day. They're trying to be scared into leaving their land, right? But many Palestinians have been steadfast, resolute. They've stayed on their land because they deserve to be on this land. It's our shared homeland. We should build a society and future together as a family, right? My future, my belief is that peace only comes, first of all, when the root causes of injustice in this land are reversed, right? And that chiefly stems with the Nakba, right of return for Palestinians, but it also comes when the aspirations of both peoples are fulfilled. That means there has to be freedom of movement in this land. There has to be full equality for both peoples, and we have to unify around a common identity, right? For as long as Jews and Arabs maintain that, oh, we're two separate peoples in this land, injustice will still occur. So to me, peace comes when we unify as one family. And in reality, we are one family. So we have a duty, obligation, and necessity to unify. And that's when peace comes.
All right, you know what? That's great, because I'll tell you the one thing that I've heard from you a few times, and even I've read about you online, which I actually think makes you unique, is you're one of the only guys that's really advocating this one family thing. And I really feel like you're living that. Like when you said earlier, from something to my brother. Oh my gosh,
we're not others, we are brothers. Yeah.
We're not others, we are brothers. You know, that's a cool statement, dude. That's a really cool statement. And you're definitely, you know, the first person that I see really kind of stressing this one family idea. So when you hear the anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, when you hear this, and obviously this is now, I mean, becoming, you know, it got passed in the House of Representatives.
Yes.
They're trying to make that a law, which actually blows me away, because I'm like, dude, this is the First Amendment, free speech, holy mackerel. But when you hear anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, what do you think about that?
Well, my first thought is always it's very ironic, right? At the start of Zionism, do you know which group was the most steadfast in opposing Zionism? It was Jews. It was typically religious Jews who had the belief that we cannot return and establish a state in Palestine until the Messiah comes. They thought Zionism was a completely secular ideology. It's something that is antithetical in many ways to Judaism based on the Torah and the Talmud. But in terms of practicality in the modern day, when people say anti-Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic, I say, look, Palestinians are not anti-Zionist because they hate Jews, right? They could have occupiers from anywhere in the world. They could be British, they could be Japanese, they could be any population. They would oppose it, right? If they occupied and were displaced from their homeland, right? The fact that it happens to be Jews is irrelevant to this notion, right? But that's not to say that every anti-Zionist is inherently not anti-Semitic, right? There are individuals that are anti-Semitic and inherently gravitate towards anti-Zionism because they perceive it as something inherently Jewish that they want to oppose. For example, David Duke, leader of the KKK, staunch anti-Zionist. Why is that? Because he hates Jews, right? There's no two ways about it. However, if I was born a Palestinian, I would be anti-Zionist. This ideology has come at my expense. Of course I would be anti-Zionist. I was kicked off my land. I don't care who did it. The fact that it was Jews is irrelevant to me, right? I want to return to my ancestral homeland, and I do not want to be barred by an ideology that says, oh, we have to have a Jewish exclusive state that's predicated on having a majority Jewish population, right? I don't care. I simply want to live in my homeland, and the political baggage that comes with that, the fact that, oh, the resistance happens to be against Jews, that does not matter, right? Simply give me my rights, give me my equality. Let's unify. The fact that as Jews actually makes this solution easier, in my opinion. We are brothers, right? Allow us to come together. That's the solution to this, right? I'll oppose anyone that seeks to harm my family, but I am willing to reach out the olive branch in hopes of peace and unity for one day, inshallah, b'ezrat Hashem.
I love it. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I personally agree with you. I think what people don't understand when it comes to the Palestinians is they just want to live their lives. Like they just want, this self-determination concept, which is another, term that's really, come to the forefront. All right, we've talked a little bit about 1948. I want to get into this campus protest stuff because I really want to understand, man, you were on the ground physically, literally and figuratively in that. What the heck happened, and how did these protests just kind of go from campus to campus to campus? Was there any coordination between you guys at the various colleges, or like give us really what happened at UT, and then any perspective you have, from Columbia, because that was a hotbed, and then anywhere else. Let's talk about the campus protests.
Sure. In terms of coordinated effort, I don't think such coordination existed between campuses. Really, the reason most campuses engaged in protests and encampments was because we saw what was coming out of Columbia, right? Historically, Columbia has always been the epicenter for movements like this. They were at the forefront of protesting the Vietnam War. They were at the forefront of protesting against apartheid in South Africa. And now, of course, they are at the forefront of protesting against the genocide in Gaza alongside the apartheid that defines the land between the river and the sea. And so we at UT on April 24th decided to organize a protest, right? It was hosted by the PSC, which is the Palestine Solidarity Committee. We at UT don't have an SJP, we have a PSC, which is Palestinian-led. And our protest was not going to be an encampment, believe it or not. It was simply just going to be a sit-in on UT's lawn. So even from the outset, we weren't even taking the more radical steps, you could say, that other universities were. We were simply going to go to UT's lawn, have a sit-in, and it was going to be completely peaceful, right? If you look at the agenda for the day, we were supposed to be doing poetry. We were going to have guest speakers, singing songs, have teach-ins. Nothing like that remotely connotates violence. I think everyone can agree upon that. And they were not even going to stay overnight. They were going to be gone by 7 p.m. And so we as protesters were ready to do that. But before the day even started, before any protesters showed up on UT's campus, Governor Greg Abbott already made statements saying UT will not become another Columbia, and I will use whatever means necessary to prevent that from happening. And so 15 minutes before the protests even started, we had state troopers on horseback entering UT's campus to expel protesters from the lawn. That did not stop the protests. They simply moved the protests to a different area of UT. But it was overtly violent, right? I think the hypocrisy of the day is really captured by my friend Amr Kadumi. He is the president of the PSC, and he was featured in the New York Times because his photo went viral. He was the leader of the chants, more or less, of the protest. The police said, you need to disperse. You need to end this protest immediately. And you know what he did? He did. He told the crowd, look, the police are telling us they're going to start arresting people if we don't disperse. We need to end this, right? We'll regroup later. And immediately after he made that announcement to the crowd, you know what happened? He was violently thrown to the ground and arrested by police and state troopers, right? So it's crazy that he was following orders and arrested. And that set the
Wow.
precedent for how the rest of the day turned out. And so eventually we made it back to the lawn, and it only got worse. There were people on horses simply charging the crowd at random, taking random people for protesting and then arresting them and throwing them in the Travis County jail. I myself, while I was not arrested, I was pushed by one of those people on horseback. I was pushed to the ground violently, and I ended up spraining my ankle because of that. Believe it or not, at the same time I was pushed to the ground and sprained my ankle, there was an elderly man around 70, 80 years old who was also pushed down to the ground, and he ended up having the back of his skull, I believe, cracked. He was bleeding. I saw the blood. And I think, I'm not sure if this audio was picked up, but I think it was apparently by CNN or whoever was recording that day. You hear me from the crowd yell out, "You're supposed to be protecting civilians, not harming the elderly," right? And it just shows how crazy that day was. And it's so sad that students are trying to articulate their First Amendment civil liberties, to call for divestment, to call for a ceasefire, and the police are not having it. They are brutally harming students. And you will see the ironic twist in all of this. Because of the force and violence that state troopers used on that day, it actually made the protest grow even bigger. Many students, recognizing that their fellow students' civil liberties were being usurped, said, "I can't stand by." Right? I might not know a lot about Gaza or Palestine, but I do know injustice when I can see it with my own eyes. So I'm going to join these protests to champion the rights of my fellow students. And I think even the majority of people that day ended up joining the protest because of that. And I think that was the scenario on many campuses. What makes it even more ironic is that UT, right, my university, of course, has relationships with weapons manufacturers, right? This is what we were protesting against, right? When we say divestment, we are asking for a university to pull its endowments from weapons manufacturers, right? Namely Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing, and others. And even then, we knew that the university legally is not allowed to do that. Texas is one of 33 states with a law on the books that makes it illegal to boycott the state of Israel. It's the only place in the world that you cannot boycott, believe it or not, right? You can boycott Canada. You can boycott Mexico. You can boycott other states in the United States, but you cannot boycott Israel. And you have to sign a public declaration that you will not boycott the state of Israel if you're engaging with business with the state or if you're a public institution. UT is a public institution, so legally, they cannot divest. They have to be putting money into these institutions, right, that are profiting off the death and destruction of the Palestinian people. So we were using our voices to also highlight that, the hypocrisy of this entire situation. We knew that the university was not going to divest, right? It's no shock to us that Abbott and the leaders of UT were not going to pull their funding from weapons manufacturers. But the fact that such repression and such violence occurred on that day is a testament to what is happening, right? To a testament of the suppression of voices. Many more people will gravitate towards our movement because they saw such injustices imposed upon us.
That's insane. That's insane. So how big was it just that one day, or did it last several days, kind of like the way Columbia did?
Several days. So the day after the first protest on April 24th, the teachers union at UT actually organized another protest. And believe it or not, because state troopers did not show up that day, it remained completely peaceful. There was no acts of violence, right? And so that just goes to show you that the ones instituting violence were not the students, right? We were not the ones causing any harm to property or disrupting classes. It was completely the state troopers. And I think that was the norm on other campuses. And we ended up actually having an encampment movement start, I think, a week later on UT's campus, right? They actually tried to set up tents. Those were completely destroyed by state troopers who came back to UT. And that day was very violent. Believe it or not, on that day, I was in a group protesting that actually got flashbanged. They were throwing grenades basically into the crowd to disrupt protesters and to dispel us. They were using mace and pepper spray, and they were spraying it on students. It was a very, very bad day, and it was terrible. My message to universities would be: you have an obligation to protect your students. What you are doing is suppressing speech for one specific ideology while protecting it for another, right? If you have an anti-Zionist orientation, your speech is suppressed. If you have a Zionist orientation, your speech is protected. And that was blatantly obvious given that there were Zionist counter-protesters at every protest who were protected by the police, right? And so this whole scenario is just crazy, right? If you're an administrator in a university, you should say, look, even if I don't agree with your perspective, you have a right, according to the First Amendment, to champion your voice. And this is an academic environment. This is a place for multiple different perspectives to be engaged with and promoted, right? This is the place to have these debates, to have these conversations. And so universities across America have dropped the ball. Emory, UT, UCLA, Columbia, they're all suppressing and attacking students specifically on one side of the aisle, and it needs to stop. All speech should be protected, and there should be no limits on what students can say in an academic environment, as long as it's not calling for violence.
No, I totally agree with that. And it's good to get this perspective from you, because, you know, what gets shown on the mainstream media was that it was the students initiating the violence, when that really couldn't be farther from the truth. The other thing I find interesting, which again did not get much coverage, is, and you touched on it, the teachers joined in. The teachers, the professors, you know, these are people that are intellects in this country. They joined in on the side of the students. Some of them, I think, were pro-Palestinian, and they were, you know, having similar views as you in terms of what's going on there. Others were simply saying, hey, it doesn't matter if I agree with what these students are saying. They have the right to say it. And I think fundamentally, if you don't agree with what you are saying, what you guys are saying, like, let's say I didn't agree with what you guys are saying, I still should agree at the fact that you have the right to say it. You know, that's insane to me. Like the fact that, again, you can disagree, but now you're taking people's voice away, and especially almost like a generation's voice. And I think a lot of what's taken place, and I'd love your perspective on this, a lot of what's taken place in terms of trying to silence or ban TikTok is because of this very situation, because TikTok is become the centerpiece for creation of, let's say, pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist information, and they want that information silenced. What are your thoughts on that? You're
100% correct. But going back to your initial point about the professors joining in, it's even more ironic given that many of the professors leading the protests were in Jewish studies, right? There was a Jewish studies professor that was harmed and beaten at Dartmouth, and she was, I think, the chair of the Jewish studies department, and she was arrested for being a part of their pro-Palestine protest movement. And you're completely right about speech as well, right? In Texas, we have a law on the books that declares phrases like "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." They declare that an anti-Semitic chant that calls for the genocide of Jews from the river to the sea, right? When you talk with Palestinians, they all give the same answers, right? When you say, what does the phrase "from the river to the sea" mean to you?
Yeah.
Every one of them, without exception, says, when I say "from the river to the sea," I mean one state where Jews and Arabs can live equally as brothers together. Now, when you hear that explanation, that's as far from genocide as possible. That's a call for equality and mutual understanding. But Greg Abbott here in Texas says no. It's a call to push all the Jews into the Mediterranean, which was what I was told growing up about that phrase, by the way. So it's very embedded within institutions, in the state, all the above. And so for outlets like TikTok to be sharing this history, they view it as very dangerous, right? It disrupts their narrative heavily, right? They know the Palestinian movement is not one predicated on violence. It's one that's predicated on equality, and one that brings together different peoples in the pursuit of a noble and just cause. And this is not something that's shocking to me, right? Historically, as media has grown, the Palestinian movement has gotten proper attention, right? The first time many people became awakened to the situation in Palestine was in the 1980s, right? It was when Israel invaded Lebanon. This is the first time that really TVs were really being utilized in an advanced fashion. They were very accessible at this time. People were getting nightly news and seeing the massacres that Israel was promoting in southern Lebanon by promoting the Maronite Christian population to kill both Palestinians as well as Shia Lebanese Muslims were very jarring to many people. Hearing the testimony about the massacres in Sabra and Shatila began to change many people's minds. And since 1982, we've had an explosion in media, right? Nowadays, like you said, we have Instagram, we have TikTok, right? And these are the primary modes for people to get their voice heard, specifically in the younger generation. Many people say, oh, the news is biased, right? They have a Zionist orientation. We can't trust what they're saying. So we will go to TikTok. We will go to Instagram to share our voice, to share our stories. So it's not suppressed. It's coming from us, right? Even though there might be issues with like Meta and their algorithms trying to suppress pro-Palestinian content, it's overwhelming on their platforms. And it's really hard to avoid, I think, for most people. And so with TikTok, how accessible it is, with Instagram and how accessible it is, everyone can see a dead Palestinian child, right? They see what's happening in Gaza. You can't avoid these images anymore, right? In 1948, you could. No one really knew the history of 1948 except through the oral history of Palestinians or through the new history created by the Israeli historians of the New Historian Movement, right? That which was released from the archival records of 1978. And so we today have a very good luxury that our ancestors did not have. We have the ability to see what's happening, arguably for the first true time in history, on the ground in real time. All 40,000 deaths are a catastrophe, but in most cases, for most people, if there was not video footage, those are just statistics, right? It's easy to remove yourself from a situation when you're not seeing images, when you're not seeing dead children, dead women, people starving to death, right? All these measures preventing water, the fuel and energy into Gaza, and the effects they're having in real time, right? But by seeing those images, it changes people's hearts, then it changes people's minds, and then it changes people's politics. And that's the power of TikTok, of Instagram, and all these other platforms on our current generation, Gen Z.
No, absolutely. I think that it's really played out in real time on your phone. I mean, you literally, we are viewing a genocide on our phones in real time while you're laying in bed or on your couch. And it's sheer concept is incredible if you really think about what's happening. But I will say, if it wasn't for these platforms and the mobile technology, no one would really know what's going on right now. This would be like it was in 2014 or another year where, quite frankly, we'd have a little blurb on the nightly news and we would move on. But this is absolutely coming to play. So how did the Al Jazeera piece happen for you? And then from there, ABC, because just for everyone's, I guess, understanding, how I found Elijah was because I watched him on a Al Jazeera clip, which got like 2-3 million views, and I was seriously, I was like, wow, what a sharp kid. Like, let me try to find this kid, because I think he could be perfect to help me understand what's going on in college campuses. So literally, that's how this is happening. I found you on Instagram, I DM'd you, you got right back to me, and it goes from there. So how did the Al Jazeera thing happen? And then talk us through some more of the media that's come from this.
Yeah, of course. And so the Al Jazeera clip was primarily about what I endured in the campus protests, right? As a Jewish student and also as a peace activist, right? I touched upon my work with the Tidna, bringing together Jews and Arabs for mutual understanding, for dialogue, all the above on college campuses. And I came across Al Jazeera because there were many media outlets present on UT's campus that day to cover what had transpired in the past 2 days. And people told these media anchors that there's this student that you should be talking to. His name's Elijah. He leads this group called the Tidna. He was active in the protests. He, in fact, was actually injured when he was pushed by state troopers. You should be interviewing this kid. And Al Jazeera, MSNBC, and Fox News all tried to interview me. Fox News tried to first, but I did not want to interview with them. I told them, I said, I'll go on your platform, but I said, I won't answer your questions. What I'm going to do is, instead of answering your questions, I'm going to tell your viewers about how Fox News was instrumental in manufacturing consent for a genocide in Iraq during the invasion of Iraq by creating this lie of weapons of mass destruction. I said, if you want me to come on your platform and talk about that, I'm happy to, but I'm not going to answer your questions, because I said, I know what you're going to ask, and it's all ridiculous. You're going to ask, is Iran funding these protests? You're going to ask, is George Soros or someone funding these protests? Like, well, like it's idiotic, right? And so I said, I'm not going to answer your questions. I'm going to tell your viewers about how your media platform bolstered Bush and Cheney to create hundreds of thousands of deaths in Iraq. That's what I'm going to do. And so I didn't interview with Fox. Obviously, they made sure not to have me on after I told them that.
That is hilarious. That is hilarious. Oh my God. That is so crazy. NBC and CBS and those guys, because they've actually, I mean,
they're bad too.
They've had their issues, but I will say on this issue, and I'll throw CNN in there, I'll throw the New York Times in there, BBC, Pierce Morgan, all these guys. I mean, yes, I can't say they've been amazing, but they've actually done more than I've thought. Fox, forget it. Fox, Newsmax. Honestly, it's anyone that is right Republican. And by the way, we can talk about that if you're versed on that, because there's an angle with the Republican Party, and then there's an angle with like Christian nationalists, you know, and their relation to Zionism, which I think plays into almost a religious biblical connotation, with the desire for and the thought that one day Jesus, who is the Christians' Messiah, and correct me if I'm wrong. Let me finish this and then correct me if I'm wrong, because you know it better than I do. Jesus, who is the Christians' Messiah, but not actually the Messiah for the Jewish religion. I don't think they consider him the guy the way the Christians do, but I feel like the Christian support, unequivocal support of Israel, has to do more with, hey, one day Jesus is going to come back, and so that land needs to be purely of Jewish faith in order for him to come back and do all the things. I might have totally gotten all that wrong, so give us your
No, you did. You explained it relatively well. That's how most people definitely understand it, right? There's a sect of Protestant Christianity known as evangelicalism, right? And they believe that the end times will only come about when Jews recreate the state of Israel. And not only that, they have to rebuild Solomon's temple, right? They have to create the third temple in Jerusalem, which is currently where the compound of Al-Aqsa Mosque is. And so right off the bat, if you destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is one of the holiest sites in Islam, that's World War III, right? So this is predicated to be a terrible issue if that dream came to fruition. Evangelical Zionists believe that once Solomon's temple is rebuilt, then that can usher in the end times. Jesus will come back, that'll spark Armageddon, and then he will reign from Jerusalem for 1,000 years, and then their end time prophecies can become real. What's ironic is throughout this entire process, most Jews will either die or convert to Christianity, according to evangelical Christian theology. And they're a huge voting bloc. They're no minority, right?
No.
Was born and raised in San Antonio. This is the backyard.
I almost think they're the majority. They're the majority.
Yeah, they're a huge component, right? If not a majority of the Republican base. Here in San Antonio, I grew up in the backyard of an individual known as Pastor Hagee. He runs a group called Christians United for Israel. It is the largest Zionist organization in the United States. Now, that should be crazy, right? The largest Zionist organization is not Jewish, it's Christian. It's completely evangelical Christian. It's funded with evangelical Christian dollars. It's not remotely Jewish. In fact, Pastor Hagee has been condemned in the past for anti-Semitic remarks. He said that the Holocaust was done by God to speed up the creation of Israel so the end times can come about. This is a man that is repulsed in many Jewish circles. They do not want to be associated with him, but he is a person who has the full attention of Donald Trump. He was at the celebration, the moment marking the movement of the embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He's one of the biggest donors to Trump, right? And so you're right. These people have immense influence, and it's very scary. It's something that is worrying. It should be noted that Republicans are in no way unified. There are many Republicans who call out the likes of evangelical Zionists. There's, in fact, many splits, I think, happening within the Republican Party, right? Of course, you have your neocons, you have your Nikki Haley's, who are more or less more warmongers, but you have more, I would call it the paleo-conservative tangent, and they tend to be isolationists. They're your Tucker Carlsons. They're the types that do not really want to be engaged in foreign affairs on Ukraine, on Israel, because they want to be, quote unquote, putting America first. That's a growing component, nowhere near, I would say, the neocon or the evangelical Christian component, but it is a fracture within the Republican Party, and an anti-Zionist fracture at that. But many people criticize this fracture because it's been prone to having neo-Nazis in the movement, Christian supremacists in the movement, right? This is Nick Fuentes. These are people that are sometimes problematic to various people. So there are splits, and they're important to point out. But like you said, neocons, evangelical Christians, they are the majority, and it's very scary.
Dude. I am going to make it my life mission to make you a celebrity spokesperson for common sense. Seriously, I just question after question. I'm blown away at your grasp of all this, and you do such a nice job articulating it. I'm kind of moving off script a little bit. So let's talk about the Democratic Party, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, I feel like with Trump and his stance, it's about the base, the voters, and the donors. I don't think he really believes in it. You know what I mean? Like, I think to me, he's just like, you know what? I need these people. I need their votes. I need their money. So I'm going to say what I think they want to hear. I really don't think he's in it. Now, ironically, let's get into the Democrats a little bit, because I do think Biden is into it. You know what I mean? Like, I think Biden is more of a Zionist than Trump is. What are your thoughts on that? And then give us your thoughts on the Democratic Party and their stance.
You're 100% right. Biden has made statements repeatedly in the past that you do not have to be a Jew to be a Zionist, right? He repeatedly peddles this phrase. And it's also ironic because he was the vice president of Obama. And I truly don't think at his core, Obama was actually a Zionist, right? He went to Columbia. He studied under Edward Said. I think he was a Zionist because, of course, given the Democratic establishment, it's a position he had to take. But I don't think at Obama's core, Obama is a Zionist. Biden believes it, right? He says he was raised in a Zionist household. He was told by his father, this is the moral position you should be taking. And his political career shows that. He's been one of the biggest defenders of Israel historically, even when it was controversial. There were times in the 1970s when it was very controversial to take pro-Israeli stances, and he was at the forefront of it. So he is at his core a Zionist, right? And it's something that is fracturing the Democratic Party. I would say more than any issue, Israel is dividing the Democratic Party, and it's a contrast between these centrist Democrats, right? These mainstream Democratic establishment types, Hillary Clinton, Biden, versus the progressive base. The progressive base is continually turning away from that faction of the party because they say we cannot be complicit in a genocide in Gaza. And so at the time we're speaking, the presidential debate will be tonight. And personally, I think the challenge for Biden is not to defeat Trump, but rather to convince progressives that he deserves their vote, right? What is he going to change on his policy in Israel that will get them to come out and not vote for Jill Stein? Right. And I think he has a long road ahead of him. He is the one that has allowed 40,000 Palestinian deaths to occur under his military support for Israel. And so many progressives are saying we in good conscience cannot vote for Biden, right? We will vote for Jill Stein, Cornel West, one of these other figures who is staunchly against the genocide happening in Gaza. There is another component of the progressive base that says, okay, I understand that, but we have two options, right? Jill Stein and Cornel West will not win the election. Right. And what the Democratic establishment is telling us is we have to pick between the lesser of two evils. Right. And that is what they're saying Biden is. And they are also trying to push the fact that, at least in the Democratic Party, there is pressure on Biden to move the needle in a more progressive direction. Right. Trump doesn't have that pressure. Right. Like you said, there's just Thomas Massie and Rand Paul that are anti-Zionist. Right. You have the likes of Lindsey Graham, who's basically saying we should Hiroshima and Nagasaki Gaza. You have people like Tom Cotton, who said on October 13th that Gaza should be turned into a pile of rubble. And we're confused about why we currently have the situation we do in Gaza. Just look at their rhetoric. They are the ones who have fomented the genocide and given them a pass to do whatever they want. No red lines. So to think that Trump will be better than Biden is crazy. He will probably be worse, right? All Trump has said on the matter is that my policy position is that Israel has to finish the problem, right? And they have to do it quickly. Now, it doesn't take a genius to read between the lines to know that probably means either eradication or it means annexation of the Gaza Strip and putting back settlers, right? There is no other way you finish this issue quickly than through the most extreme means. And Trump will give them the green light to do that. Now, Biden, on the other hand, he does not have that luxury. He has pushback from his progressive base, right? He has pushback from people like AOC, Greg Kazar, and other progressives in Congress that are not on board with giving Israel a blank check, right? They believe that we have to start conditioning the aid to Israel. Bernie Sanders has also been vocal, even though I have my critiques of Bernie. He has not used the word genocide.
What are your thoughts on Bernie? What are your thoughts on Bernie? I'd like your overall take, because I've talked about Bernie a lot on the podcast, and I've mentioned a lot of clips on him, and I'll give you my thoughts before you share yours. I mean, he was late to the game in this, but I will say, dude goes after Netanyahu more than anyone else. Him and Jon Stewart, and pulling a comedian into it. But like Jon Stewart and Bernie Sanders, man, they are pretty relentless. So again, you have to give them credit for that. But what are your thoughts on those guys?
No, but both Jon Stewart and Bernie Sanders, I've been big fans of them for a long time, right? Before October 7th, Bernie was arguably the most critical person in the Senate condemning Netanyahu, right? Condemning the acts in the West Bank. He was at the forefront of condemning settler violence. He has typically been the best person we can point to in the Senate. After October 7th, I have my critiques of Bernie. Bernie said that how can you have a ceasefire when you have Hamas saying that they will repeat October 7th, right? And so to me, that was a talking point of AIPAC, right? That was a talking point of these Zionist groups that do not want to see a ceasefire, right? A ceasefire is possible, right? And it will be honored. Hamas, despite all their political posturing, will eventually agree to a ceasefire, right? And Bernie should know that, right? So it was very bad taste to make a statement like that early on. Bernie should have been championing for the cessation of violence from all parties, the release of hostages, and the end to the bloodshed and genocide in Gaza. That's what he should have said. Secondly, my other big critique of Bernie is he hasn't used the word genocide. And it's very sad. Other progressives in the House have used the word genocide. Jamal Bowman, who just got ousted by AIPAC, right? It was the most money ever funneled into a congressional election in history, got ousted because he used the word genocide. He called it out. And not only that, Jamal Bowman visited the West Bank. He saw the situation for himself. He saw the apartheid firsthand, right? And so it's no surprise why AIPAC was very scared of this guy. But Bernie did not use the same language, right, as other progressives in his coalition were using. And so I think Bernie is still better than almost everyone else in the Senate. But he has a long way to go, and he needs to be more staunch in his vocabulary. He needs to take harsher measures. But I think he is workable. I think many other senators are far gone, but he's definitely workable.
Okay. All right. You know what? Dude, we're going off script because I've got a better direction now. You are so well versed. I can't believe you're 21. I mean, if you told me you were 61, I'd be like, you're so well versed. I can't believe you're only 61. But dude, the fact that you're 21 and you're dropping these nugs on us, I love it. All right, let's do this. This is a fun game. I'm going to say a name, and then you give us your thoughts on it. I think this will be good. All right, let's start. Benjamin Netanyahu.
Genocidal freak.
All right. Nikki Haley.
Warmonger.
All right. Donald Trump.
Warmonger and criminal.
Okay. Joe Biden.
Warmonger and a little too old. We'll put it that way.
Okay. All right. Jill Stein.
A voice of reason, and probably the best Jewish individual I can think of in a political space talking about Gaza.
Okay. Barack Obama.
I would say he's internally conflicted. I would say at his heart, he has a moral position on Gaza, right? Like I said, he studied under Edward Said. He knows the history very well, but he was pushed by the Democratic establishment to take a much more pro-Israel stance than he otherwise should have.
Okay. All right. Itamar Ben-Gvir.
Fascist Judaic Nazi, if you want to put it bluntly. The man is a terrorist. He, in his younger days,
that dude is psycho.
He was considered too radical to even serve by the IDF. He was a man who was arguably one of the most responsible individuals for getting Yitzhak Rabin assassinated.
Yeah,
he's crazy. Yeah. He's absolutely crazy. And he was one of the individuals who, when Oslo was going about and they were trying to reach an interim agreement, he went up to Yitzhak Rabin's car and actually ripped off the head of the I forget what car Rabin had, but he ripped off the head monument of the car and said, "We're coming for you next," basically. And what happened the next day? Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a far-right fascist in Israel. And so Ben
Yeah.
Gvir is a terrorist. He is one of the most heinous individuals in this entire scenario. It's just disgusting.
All right. That was amazing. Okay, who do you like? Who do you get your information from? I mean, these new historians. By the way, I think you're going to be the first in a group of new historians. Seriously, dude. You got a bright future ahead of you, man. You really have an incredibly bright future ahead of you. But help my audience understand when you are looking for information, because I know I keep paying you compliments, but you deserve them. You're so thorough in your analysis of things. Who do you get your information from, or where do you get your information from, or even not even get your information? Who do you listen to? What do you read? What do you look at? Help us understand that.
Great question. And so I would say the best source of information is always people on the ground, right? Motaz Azaiza, these other journalists in Gaza are probably the best source of information for what's happening on the ground in Gaza and for individuals enduring a genocide. So I always try and go to Palestinian journalists living in the West Bank and in Gaza, right? Miriam Barghouti is another one that I go to all the time. She's fantastic. She works for Plus 927, which is actually an Israeli outlet, but it's anti-Zionist. It's very progressive. They do fantastic work. And overall, I try and first and foremost always listen to the people on the ground, the people living it day to day. They're the ones who have the best insights. You should always be listening to Palestinian voices. But also you should be listening to Israeli voices, right? Read what Israeli media is saying, right? I try and read Haaretz all the time, but I also try and read more right-wing outlets, right? I try and read Ynet. I try and read the overtly right-wing outlets in Israel because it gives you an insight into their society. It allows you what you're thinking, right? I'm not in that headspace, so I need to be reading what they're saying. So, of course, be reading Israeli outlets too. Now, if you're going into academia like me, my goal is to become a professor of international law, right? You should be reading people like Ilan Pape, Avi Schleim, and like we said, Norman Finkelstein is fantastic. I would love to meet him one day. Personal hero of mine. These are people that you should really be working with for sure in terms of your just knowledge of the historical components of the situation. The news I would stay away from is typically Western outlets. They're typically the least inclined to get the situation right. They're most likely to simply just parrot something that the Israeli government told them, and that was very prevalent after October 7th. Right? We had Biden, without any proof, articulate that 40 beheaded babies were killed by Hamas. Now we do know that there were kids killed by Hamas, right, and those need to be condemned, right? But there was not 40 beheaded babies. That was false, and there were atrocities committed by Hamas. But news like that is to manufacture consent for genocide, right? And that's what ended up playing out. So stay away from those mainstream Western outlets on this situation, in my opinion.
That's fantastic, man. All right, listen. You know what we're gonna do, because if you're up for this, I seriously would like to bring you back on, and what you and I can do is maybe, I've really been searching for somebody to do this. I never thought a 21-year-old would meet this need as would fit this bill as well as you do. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to craft really the super important times. Like, we could even start with the Balfour Declaration of 1917, go to 1948, go to 1967. I'd like to talk about, the Oslo Accords. I'd like to talk about Yasser Arafat, Yitzhak Rabin, like all of that stuff. And I feel like all of that. So maybe what we do is we basically will create specific, 5-minute stuff where we go over all this, because I've tried to give this audience a pretty thorough, overall understanding and make people really realize this did not start on October 7th, 2023. This started, I take it to 1917 and the Balfour Declaration. I'm sure it can be taken even further back to that with Theodore Herzl and really the birth of Zionism and all that. So I think what we do, man, is let's create a program together, because that would seriously be great, because you've got such a grasp on all this stuff. I'm just blown away. What do you think? Should we do that?
I think we should. I think it would be fantastic. And like I said, I run the group called Atidna, where our whole premise is dialogue. This is something I've been engaging with for around 2 years. And not all the dialogue is debate, but I'm very happy to engage in debates. And I think it's one of the most constructive ways to enlighten people, right? Show them both narratives, allow them to choose for themselves, right? There's no better way to do that. One thing I do want to point out, based on what you just articulated, I don't even honestly, when we say history did not start on October 7th, right? This is one of the most common talking points, right, from the Israeli narrative. Just look what they did on October 7th to see why we're doing everything. And I think it's important for listeners to know, you don't have to go back to the Nakba to understand why the situation in Gaza culminated on October 7th. You don't have to go back to 1917. You don't have to go back to the first Aliyah, the first wave of Zionist pioneers. Go back the last 20 years, right? Put yourselves in the shoes of a Gazan. Right? If I were to ask you, do you know what the average age of a Hamas militant is?
I would say 18.
18 to 25, basically.
Wow.
That's the crux of their base, and that's my age. And look at what they've had to endure their entire lives. I myself was born in 2002, and I was born right in the midst of the Second Intifada, one of the most violent times in the entire land. Fast forward a few years, and what do you have? You have the blockade of Gaza, right? The election of Hamas, and then you have the blockade of Gaza, right? Israel removed its settlers from Gaza, but they transferred their occupation of one of an internal occupation to one that is surrounding the Gaza Strip, along with Egypt. Egypt also needs to be called out for their complicity in this. And so they control what goes in and out of Gaza. Mm-hmm. Combine that with Israel's policy of mowing the lawn. Every few years, Israel engages in a campaign of mass bombing in the Gaza Strip. Right? 2008, 2012, 2014, we've seen it all the way up until the modern day. Right? If I was an individual who was born in the Gaza Strip and I had to endure such repeated acts of violence with the world continually blind, right? I'm not justifying Hamas in any sense of the word, but I'm just saying put yourself in their shoes. I can understand why people come to the conclusions of why they want to join a group like Hamas, right? There's no hope, and you've continuously had your lives upended by Israel. Your parents were likely descendants of people who survived the Nakba. Right? The fact that you're in an open-air concentration camp is from an injustice, but your entire life has been defined by injustices. So I myself will say, contextualize why October 7th happened. It happened because of the injustices imposed by the occupation. And if you want something like October 7th to never happen again, upend the root causes for violence in the land, upend the occupation, create one state where both peoples have full and equal rights. That is how you guarantee security for both Jews and Arabs from the river to the sea. But I also want to point out that the current talking point of the Israeli government, and the main reason that they don't want a ceasefire, is because they say that total victory means the elimination of Hamas, right? This is what Netanyahu says over and over. It's what he's saying to this day and why he won't sign a ceasefire. And I just want to say to Netanyahu, right? First of all, Hamas is a political ideology. Short of killing every Palestinian, you can never get rid of a political ideology, right? As long as there's Palestinians to live and breathe, that ideology can flourish. But let's go into your fantasy land for a second. Let's say you do eliminate Hamas, right? Let's say you kill every Hamas militant in their both political and military wing, which I should add, you cannot kill people according to international law until they themselves pick up arms. So legally speaking, they are killing people in Hamas's political faction, but that is illegal under international law. But going back to my main point of contention, let's say you do kill everyone in Hamas. Right? With the amount of violence you have created on October 7th, with the amount of people you have orphaned, with the amount of people you have stripped of their limbs, what do you think is going to happen if you eliminate Hamas? Because I know that something even more radical, something even more violent will take its place, right? If you took so many people in my family, if you kill my parents, if you kill my siblings, if you kill my cousins, right, I'm going to come to an even more extreme conclusion than the people who are currently underpinning Hamas. I would go down trying to take some Israelis with me, right? That might sound crazy to some people, but it's the reality on the ground. So my advice to Israelis would be the following. This might be a very controversial opinion, but I think it is moral and just, right? Look what happened with the PLO, right? Before Oslo, the PLO was the worst terrorists Israel had to endure back then, right? They were the ones doing the plane jackings. They were the ones bombing airports, right? These were, before Hamas, like the worst terrorists known to man for the Israelis. But you know what the Israelis did? They normalized them. They made them normal political actors, and it moderated them. If you want to prevent Hamas from continuing its reign of destruction, rather than claiming you're going to kill everyone in Hamas, what you should be doing is trying to engage with them as a normal political actor. And it starts with creating a ceasefire between you and Hamas. You need to make them normalized within Palestinian politics. That means promoting them being reconciled with the PLO and creating one unified political branch. And that also stems to another issue. Why is Hamas and the PLO not unified, right? Why are they two disparate political entities in Palestine? Why is that? And the answer is Benjamin Netanyahu. He knew from the outset that divide and conquer is the best policy possible with Palestinians. And why is that? A, it prevents the creation of a Palestinian state, because people will see that if the craziest, most Islamist branch is running Palestine, then no sane actor in global politics will normalize with them. They cannot recognize a Palestinian state if it's run by Hamas. If it was run by Fatah, the PLO, PFLP, these secular nationalist parties, then the world would be more receptive to saying, yeah, I should probably normalize, right? I should engage with this. I should recognize the Palestinian state. So Netanyahu from day one has been saying, I am the best person who can prevent a Palestinian state. And you know how he's been doing it? He's been allowing Qatar to funnel billions for Hamas, right? He is the source of this current problem. Benjamin Netanyahu bears full responsibility, not only for October 7th, but for how Hamas is currently operating. He bears the full brunt of it, and he needs to reap the political consequences and probably be in jail, if not from Israeli authorities, by an international court, right? He has already had arrest warrants issued by the ICC, and I hope a foreign country acts upon that and puts him in jail.
Absolutely. I think you touched on so many things. Again, I've talked about a lot of that on a lot of what you said on the podcast as well, and how I think in 2017, like the Times of Israel reported about Netanyahu funding Hamas, allowing the Qatar money to flow into Hamas to create that division between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. I mean, I've gone so far as to think that like Hamas is almost a creation of Netanyahu's and a creation of the Israeli government in order to keep the war going. You know, there's what's the expression I've used? The two worst businesses are peace and good health. Peace and good health are not good businesses, but war and disease and sickness are good businesses. And so, you know, I've always had my, I refer to Hamas as goofy on the podcast a lot. And then the Palestinian Authority. Yeah. What are your, actually, we're going to go a couple more questions. What are your thoughts on the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas and all that? Where do you think they fit in?
Sure, I think they're weak and ineffective, right? So what the PA is, right, after Oslo was created, they had a mandate to create a governing body within the West Bank. So the PLO then pushed power to the PA, right? So the creation of Yasser Arafat, which is currently run by Mahmoud Abbas. And they're seen as feckless and ineffective, right? They are continually caving to the demands of the IDF. They will cooperate with their security forces and detain other Palestinians that they suspect in engaging with terroristic activities on behalf of Israel. They're viewed as very feckless and very weak. Now, I will say, in terms of the entire PLO, not every party is bad, right? The current governing coalition is that of Fatah, right? Mahmoud Abbas, who is set to die, right? He's very old, so I don't suspect he will live much longer. He's also overtly obese. He's not in the best health, right? I don't suspect he'll go much longer. But there are other factions that I think are better. And a faction that really champions a lot of what I'm talking about, right? My notion that Jews and Arabs are one family, specifically Jews and Palestinians, we should unify and create a state together, is the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It was founded by a Christian Palestinian from the town of Lid, and his name was George Habash. They're a socialist communist party. But they believe that a lot of the issues in the land in terms of liberation and the questions of after liberation stem from imposing a mono identity on the land. So, for example, Zionism seeks to impose a Jewish exclusive identity on the land. Hamas, if they had their way, would seek to create an Islamic state, right? One based on Sharia. It would have an exclusive Islamic identity. The PFLP explains a lot of what I tried to explain. They say Arab nationalism, Jewish nationalism, Islamic nationalism, these are all reactionary identities. What we should be doing is going back in our history and creating an identity together, right? What Palestinian Arab nationalism is, which is really a more modern innovation, is a reaction to Zionism in many respects. It's not something that is rooted in Palestinian history. Before 1948, most Palestinians, when you asked them, what is your identity? Before they would say Palestinian, what they would say is, oh, I'm from Haifa, I'm from Nablus, I'm from Jerusalem, I'm from these cities, and then I'm Palestinian, right? Palestinian identity is very entrenched within the locality, right? If you look at the dresses of Palestinian women, they're called patris. It always varies by city. And the reason that's important is because that has been lost in the current situation, right? With a lot of nationalism, many Palestinian academics are pulling from others in the Arab world and creating an encompassing Arab national identity. And that's not something rooted in Palestinian history. What was most important in Palestinian history was the locality. And that still holds true today. Now, for most of your listeners, they probably know that the biggest symbol in Palestinian historiography is the key, right? They hold the keys to their homes that they're expelled from in 1948. The reason for that is their aspiration of right of return is not just to be in the land, but to be in the same village as their ancestors were, right? They got to be in the same home if it's possible, right? That is the aspiration, which is really lost when you're creating an Arab nationalist identity, right? So what the PFLP does is they say what Jews and Arabs should do is create an identity that works for both peoples, that allows us to fulfill both our aspirations together. And that's exactly what I say. I believe that a solution cannot come about unless both peoples have full and free access to the land, right? As a Jew, I want to be able to visit Jerusalem. I want to be able to visit Hebron and live there and see all the great places of the West Bank. And I know many Palestinians similarly say, I want to be in Israel proper, right? I want to be in a liberated land where I can see Haifa, I can see Jerusalem, I can see the places my family were expelled from and prevented from returning after 1948. Both our peoples need full and equal access to this land. That's how you solve this conflict with right of return. Everyone, both Jews and Arabs, specifically Palestinian Arabs, need that equality and freedom of movement. And now the question is, how do we achieve that? It's probably under a one-state solution. Specifically, when I say one-state solution, many people will say, how can a one-state solution work, right? What we're seeing in the media is we're likely about to see a one-state reality on the ground play out in full. As Smoltrich just said, he wants to create de facto annexation in the West Bank and transfer it from military authority to civilian authority, right? Which would be an Israeli one-state apartheid state from the river to the sea based on exclusionist, Zionist, Jewish supremacy. Right? It's a terror. That's the worst form of apartheid we can imagine, but that's what Smoltrich hopes for. Now, the other alternative that people say was one state Palestine, right? Which could work, but it depends to me how you define Palestinian identity, right? Is Palestinian an exclusively Arab identity, right? Is it one that you try and create a more inclusive identity around? Something I like to promote is something either promoting a unified Semitic identity. Both Jews and Palestinians are Semitic peoples. We should be able to unify around that. Or better yet, a Canaanite identity. If you look back in the history of both Jews and Palestinians, we both descend from the Canaanites. Right? Genetic studies have shown, whether you're Ashkenazi Jewish, Sephardi Jewish, Palestinian, or Lebanese, our ancestors are overwhelmingly similar on our paternal ancestry, right? They come from Canaanites, right? Which really, if you want to take a secular view of history, the Israelites are just an outgrowth of Canaanites, right? They were Canaanites who had a monotheistic identity, and that created the Israelites. Palestinians, likewise, they trace their roots back to the Canaanites, right? As I mentioned, Chatris, it comes from Canaanite garbs, right? Both the keffiyeh and the Jewish talit are respective cultural garbs. Both come from Canaanite garbs that predated the Israelites. And so really, what I think would be a better solution is creating an identity for both peoples around our roots, specifically Canaanite roots. Call it one state Canaan, right? Allow both peoples to have full and equal access to the land. And the reason that's even more important, I think when you have one identity that both peoples are full and equal participants in, you eliminate hatred, right? Jews will say, I need a Jewish state because historically Jews have been at the mercy of the other, right? The dominant other, right? Even when we were in Germany, right? Even if we got German citizenship, we were never considered Germans, right? They still persecuted us because we were Jews. We were never viewed as Germans. We were never viewed as French. We were never viewed as Russian, right? That's why we need a Jewish state to protect ourselves as a strong majority in this land. And what I would say is the reason one state Canaan deviates from that notion, right? You're not going to be at the behest of an other people is because you view yourselves as the same people. Both Jews and Arab Palestinians would define themselves as a Canaanite people, as a Semitic people, however you want to have it. We simply have to stop viewing ourselves as others. When we view ourselves as one family, we humanize each other and we have no roots for violence anymore. We might have different religious practices, right? There will be people that are Jewish in this land, Christian in this land, Muslim in this land, and they can practice their faith, but that's secondary, right? First and foremost, we both hail from this land. We both have a common identity. We both have shared roots. Let's unify around that in peace, prosperity, and security.
From others to brothers.
Yeah. 100%.
A wise guy once told me that. All right, that was awesome. All right, let me ask you this, dude. You must catch a lot of grief in your community, and when I say your community, I'm talking the Jewish community. I'm sure you've been called a self-hating Jew. I know there's another term. I might mess it up, so correct me. Capo. Is it capo or kappa?
Capo. Sounds Italian.
Sound Italian. So tell me about that, because I'm sure you're getting called all those things.
Yeah, I definitely am. So the term capo really does hit close to home. I had family that I lost in the Holocaust. And what a capo is a Jew who would sell out fellow Jews to the Nazis. And really, it's a term of shame for our community, right? Anyone who tries to deviate in any respect from normative Jewish positions will typically be called either a self-hating Jew, like you said, or a capo. But in my position, I do not view myself as a self-hating Jew in any respects. A Jew who understands their identity, first and foremost, knows the most important tenet of our religion is to preserve life, right? Same in Islam. And so to me, what I'm calling for, right, a ceasefire, one state based on unity and togetherness, all these notions, these preserve life. These preserve the lives of both the Jews and Arabs from the river to the sea. So to me, I'm not a self-hating Jew. I'm a self-loving Jew. I hate genocide because genocide is antithetical to Judaism, right? I'm a self-loving Jew. I love my religion. I love my ethnicity. I love my culture. I love everything about me. And I love the land from the river to the sea. It's because I love that land and its people, both Jewish and Palestinian, that I want to see them unify. What I will also say, in many respects, is what I'm saying is pro-Israeli. The more violence continues in Gaza, the more you will be creating future generations that hate you 1,000 times more than the current generation. You're creating the future bases of Hamas, right? And they will come to kill Israelis in the future because of the hatred that you have invoked over the past 9 months. And so what I'm articulating for calling for a cessation of violence, for unity of both people, will snuff out that hatred in favor of reconciliation, right? My path is a path that allows Israelis to live in peace for once in history. That is not a position of self-hating Jews. That is a position of loving Jews and hoping the most of them can survive and prosper in our shared homeland with Palestinians. And so overall, the terms hold no merit. I'm not a self-hating Jew. I'm not a capo. I'm someone who simply values life, right? I think you reposted on your podcast a little clip of me saying that I'm not a self-hating Jew, right? I'm a genocide-hating Jew. Perfect term to describe me, because that's very Jewish. Every Jew should be against genocide if they understand the morals underpinning our faith and culture. And overall, I just believe that at our core, Jews are people that have historically been on the side of justice, right? We are at the forefront of civil rights. We are at the forefront of anti-apartheid in South Africa. And so it's very discouraging to me to see us engage in such barbarism in Gaza, right? To see us engage in the barbarism from 1948 until today. This is a sad creation of history. And really, it's a story of hurt people hurting people, right? The Jewish people, more than any other people, I think we can agree, have endured immense grief throughout history, probably more than anyone else, right? From our expulsion from the land by the Romans 2,000 years ago, to a history of pogroms, genocides, inquisitions, all the above. We have been at the brunt of our oppressors throughout history. However, as someone who's had family in the Holocaust and all these recent catastrophes to the Jewish people in history, I would expect people to come to a conclusion of empathy for other oppressed peoples, right? One where they should see the Palestinian story and see the plight of it and come to the conclusion that I need to unify and support these people. However, that sadly is not the case in most instances. Typically, we see people monopolize their grief. They say, we have suffered the most, so we have a monopoly over suffering. No one can criticize us, right? Because we endured these atrocities throughout history, we have the right to do whatever we want to rectify the injustices of the past 2,000 years. And that is not the right conclusion. The right conclusion is unifying with oppressed peoples, which has historically been the route most people have taken throughout history in the Jewish community. And I hope we revert back to that soon. B'ezrat Hashem, God willing.
Absolutely, man. That was great. All right, last question. This is true. What do you think's next? What do you think's next? What's going to happen? How's it going to end? Is it going to end? Is Lebanon next? What's going to happen?
Yeah, Lebanon is next. I truly believe that there will be a war with Lebanon. I think it's inevitable. It's just about what happens to be the trigger for it. And it will be a catastrophic war. The UN has already released reports saying this will be a war that potentially engulfs the region in complete violence. It's going to be a barbaric and catastrophic war. And Israel is really a chaotic state, right? Norman Finkelstein said it better than I ever could. He basically said they say in the presses every 3-4 years, we have to go to war with Lebanon, we have to go to war with Syria, we have to go to war with Iran, we have to go to war with all these people, et cetera, et cetera. And we're seeing that play out on the ground in Lebanon right now. It's the culmination of this chaotic society manifesting in a very fascistic manner. Now, with regards to Lebanon, I think Israel is very short-sighted, right? The last time they had a bout with Lebanon, they lost in 2006. And back then, Hezbollah only had, I think, 10,000 bombs. Today, they have 200,000 bombs. So if they can't even handle the military imprecision of a Hamas missile decimating an Israeli town, what do they think is going to happen when Hezbollah, a much more well-equipped military, starts berating them with missiles? They are going to be decimated. It is going to be terrible. This will definitely engulf the region in war. I would not be shocked if the U.S. decides to intervene on Israel's behalf, which will trigger Iran to come in on Hezbollah's behalf. And then we might see a coalition of Arab countries like Jordan and Egypt, which are in the Western sphere, come in on behalf of Israel to fight Lebanon. And then you're going to see militias in Syria and Iraq come in on part of the Hezbollah. And then I don't know if Saudi Arabia wants to get involved, but they will too. It's going to be catastrophic, and it could spark a world war, let alone a regional war. And so I have not optimistic sights for the future, sadly.
Okay, I completely agree, and it could be a world war that happens that negates a November election in the United States. My hat's off. Well, if I was wearing a hat, I would take it off to you and I would tip it to you. Thank you so much. I think you provided such a detailed, concise, yet easy to understand explanation on so many things. And I look forward to, I'd like to craft something with you in order to create almost like a series of information and have you on the Deep Shallow Dive much more, because I truly think you are one of the voices that needs to get heard right now. And I give you my commitment to do everything I can to really try to amplify that for you.
Ray, you are the man. I really do hope that we create that platform. I think it could really educate a lot of viewers. And if you're all right with it, I would like to end with a few words for your Jewish and Arab listeners, if that's okay.
Would love that.
I, as an individual, just want to say, I think every human being is capable of change. And the way change is possible is when you put yourself in uncomfortable positions. If you're Jewish, Arab, Palestinian, Israeli, my advice to you would be simply talk to the other. In most institutions, including college campuses, including on the ground in Israel and Palestine, including in every facet, there's heavy divisions between our two communities. Really, there is no space for our two communities to even meet, let alone talk with the other. Take the initiative to talk to the other. Because when you talk to them, you begin to see they're not different, right? They really are your family in every respect, from culture, ancestry, religion, identity, aspirations. We are one family. And when we can have that conversation, we begin to realize it. There are factors in the West that want to see us divided historically and today. And so the best way we can overcome those factors is by meeting the other. Because like I've told Ray multiple times today, when we meet, we learn that we're not others, but brothers. And that is the path forward. That is the path to peace, liberation, unity, equality, all of the above. And that is my hope for the future.
That was incredibly well said. All right, listen, stay on the line. We're going to say goodbye to everybody. This is not the last you've heard from this guy. Elijah is going to be an absolute continual contributor to the Deep Shallow Dive. All right, everybody, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.